My Lords, I know there is a 5-minute advisory time limit, but this bill raises very, very significant issues, and I hope that noble Lords will allow me a little more time than that. And I thought that my noble friend the Whip on the front bench would like early notice of that. My Lords, I believe we should apply very stringent tests to any new legislation, particularly when criminal offences are created. There needs to be clear evidence of a problem. Legislation has to be necessary to deal with the problem. The drafting must be clear and unambiguous, and the new law must avoid other harms. My Lords, I believe this bill does not pass any of these tests, but I will be concentrating my remarks only on the first test, namely the evidence base for the bill. Now, the government have certainly tried to be evidence-based in their LBGT policies. In 2015, they commissioned an evidence review by the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, and that found that the evidence base for an effective assessment of inequality and relative disadvantage by sexual orientation and gender identity is deficient and has major gaps. The government then organised a national LGBT survey in 2017, which got a lot of responses. The survey found that a very small proportion, 5%, had been offered conversion therapy, and an even smaller proportion had actually undergone it, 2%. Now, the respondents were a self-selected sample, which has obvious problems, and the survey did not define what conversion therapy was, a problem that we continue to face with this bill. Nor did it define what constituted being offered conversion therapy. And I think the best we can say about this survey is that it is interesting. In 2021, the government published 3 more studies. Now, one tried to correct for some of the problems with the LGBT survey by weighting some of the data. It could not, of course, correct for the underlying problems of the survey, and so we might conclude that this study, too, is at best interesting. The government had commissioned Coventry University to conduct a research review and a qualitative study. They reviewed 46 pieces of research in order to determine what forms conversion therapy takes and who experiences it. Now, the vast majority of these pieces of research were North American studies, and only 2 came from the UK. If you go into the report's annexes, you find the problems that Coventry University identified with most of the research that they reviewed. This included lack of randomised controlled trials, reliance on retrospective self-reporting, self-selecting samples, and the use of a wide variety of conversion therapy methods without differentiating between them. So what did this research survey actually find? My Lords, not very much. The much trumpeted finding is that there is no evidence that conversion therapy is effective at changing sexual orientation or gender identity. This is not relevant to the bill. We do not ban something because it doesn't work, unless it is itself harmful, to which I will return. The review found that there were no studies that dealt with effectiveness in the context of gender identity. Hence, its conclusion that there is no evidence to show that conversion therapy does not change gender identity is best ignored. The report also says that there is, and I quote, an increasing amount of quantitative evidence that exposure to conversion therapy is statistically associated with poor mental health outcomes. Now, that sounds important, but the report explicitly found no causal connection between the two. And the issue of causation is important because there is considerable evidence that LGBT people in general have poorer than average mental health, and no attempt has been made anywhere to identify the impact of this. Now, the qualitative study was undertaken to identify the outcomes of conversion therapy. The Coventry University interviewed just 30 people, including 6 who identified as transgender or non-binary, of whom 3 said they had been offered conversion therapy. More than 2/3 of this sample said that they were Christians and 93% were white. And so this sample is both tiny and demographically challenged. Now, from this base, the report highlights self-reported harms from conversion therapy. The detailed findings, however, contain a somewhat grudging concession that 1/3 reported benefits from conversion therapy. So there we have it. From a rather flimsy research base, there is no evidence that conversion therapy actually causes harms. And while there are some reported harms from the tiny sample of 30, there are also reports of benefits. Lastly, my lords, the Government Equalities Office produced a report which supplemented the Coventry research and concentrated on differences between conversion therapies aimed at sexual orientation and those aimed at gender identity. My lords, this adds nothing of substance to the other studies, and small print records that there is next to no evidence on gender identity conversion therapy other than in relation to self-reported harms. I must also refer to findings by a survey carried out by the Ozanne Foundation in 2020, because I anticipated that some noble lords might refer to this. Now, that reported some startling findings, including that conversion therapies had included beatings and rape, which are, of course, already criminal offences. Freedom of information requests to police forces have unearthed not a single documented case of violent conversion therapy in the last 5 years. Like the other reports, it suffered from many methodological problems, including self-selection, incomplete reporting, and retrospective reporting. It was demographically unrepresentative, and it quite simply does not constitute robust evidence. My lords, I do not believe there is a sound evidence basis for the existence of a conversion therapy problem, let alone the harms that might be associated with it. The fact that LGBT lobbyists assert that there is a problem does not constitute evidence upon which responsible legislators can rely. And I will conclude by saying that if the noble Lady Burt seeks to progress this bill into committee, I know that many noble lords, not all of whom are speaking today, will want to engage very closely in that process.
Yeah. Well done.